into this. Go ahead, Ron.
So today's big on how we can incorporate speed and agility and all that kind of stuff into our practices. I think that this is probably like, we think it's easy, but then actually once you get into the depths of it, you can kind of incorporate it into your actual skill work too, which I think is huge. One thing I learned from Sam was that you can train speed as much as you want, but if you're not strong enough to do it, then it's going to be tough. And then on the flip side, if you're really strong, that doesn't mean you're going to be fast. So it's kind of finding that balance. But Sam, get into some of the sprint stuff. So now, I mean, we got the coaches now, so we can actually get into like how to turn it on, how to actually get the kids faster, how many days a week to do it, how do we incorporate it into consistent practice, things like that. And the intensity of it too. Like, do you do it really intense before practice, or do you do sprint stuff intense after practice? Because, we just want to make sure that we're able to help them as we're doing it. Or do we specify a full day into sprint agility work? You know what I mean? So how would you kind of go about that?
So my absolute favorite quote that I think I've ever heard regarding fitness is that fatigue masks performance. And I think it's the best thing I've ever heard, because so many times, as a strength athlete, somebody who lifts a lot of weight, you might go in one day and the weight feels really heavy. And you're like, what the frick's happening, right? You're just fatigued. Like, you literally are fatigued to the point where it's masking what you can actually do. And a lot of times athletes live in that state for potentially a whole season because they never recover. I mean, I've had athletes tell me their plan was to stay up until 5 a.m, go to sleep until 7 a.m. So it's a solid 2 hours, go to the gym, come back home and sleep. Like, that dude's never going to be recovered throughout the whole summer. He's 100% going to be fatigued. You're never actually going to see what he can do. So if you talk about sprint work, it's the same thing. It's making sure that you're not getting athletes fatigued when they're sprinting. And I know I've said it a ton and I'll keep saying it, but you just got to make sure that you're not getting athletes fatigued when you're doing sprint work. And I think it's the hardest part as a coach, because you want to keep things moving and you don't want to feel like you're just sitting there. And like, I've had the same issue with the weight room at times, where if we're doing like a heavy squat or something like that, I need a guy to take, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. So for me, I just program little filler exercises so they don't realize they're resting. So what we do is, like, if we're doing a heavy deadlift or heavy squat, we'll do that. And then we'll do some arm care stuff, and we'll do maybe like a breathing exercise, and then we'll come back to it. So all of a sudden they just took a 4-minute break without knowing they're taking a 4-minute break. So if you're doing sprint work, it's the same thing. If you guys can do a sprint, like I think the rabbit and coyote sprints they're called. I'm a huge fan of them. It's basically where you have an athlete like 10 feet ahead of the other athlete. And the one in the front is called the rabbit. The other one's the coyote. And as soon as the rabbit gets up and moves, the coyote's trying to catch him. And you just have to make sure that you put an end distance on it. So it's only like, 30 yards or something like that. But it's just a way to get guys, competitive. You get them sprinting, you get them moving fast. And you can absolutely work at 100% pregame, pre-practice, 100% for sure. No doubt in my mind. It's just making sure that you're not adding the volume to it. So if I only do 3 sprints at 100% and they're all 20, 30 yards, the guys aren't going to be tired. They're going to feel great as long as I leave 3 minutes of rest in between each sprint. But if you start to do a sprint, walk back, do another sprint right away, walk back, do another sprint, all of a sudden we've done like 7 sprints, the guys haven't had a nice break, you're going to start to see guys that are fatigued, and you're going to see their performance masked, right? And that's the last thing you want. You don't want a guy fatigued going into a game or a practice, because they're not going to perform well. You're going to start to see skills get sloppy. Nothing's going to really work well. So pregame, I think it's really important to do that sprint work. Pre-practice, same thing. Again, if you're in season, you're probably going to do it more often. You're probably going to do it for less duration. You're probably going to do less of them. You're probably only going to do a few of them for shorter distance, 10 to 20 yards, working on that acceleration. And if you're out of season, you're probably doing a lot more work where you're actually getting 30, 40 yards, probably not past that, because you're training baseball players or softball players. But besides that, you're still doing your acceleration work. It's just a matter of how much. So you might have 2 days where you do a lot of sprint work, and then on every other day you're doing just a little bit just to prime them up.
Yeah, I think that's big. And so understanding to take rest and make sure that we have time, like giving them time off, I think is huge. I was in the wrong for a long time. I was the coach that was like, okay, let's get our steel breaks going. I actually used to do it where one coach would do a sprint or would do a come set, and he would do a pitch. And then on the other side, when they got down to second base, then I would have another coach say, all right, get back to the line, let's go. And they would do it that way. And what I noticed was that then the first part of practice, they were sluggish anyway. And I was like, man, why are you guys so slow today? Are you not taking care of your bodies, or you're not going to the gym? But in reality, I was at fault because I wasn't giving them enough time to actually go through and do it the right way. But what I noticed with myself is when we would do some home to first sprint for times, we would do steel breaks for times, because there's only one first base on the field. So I would actually give them time to relax and they would kind of go to the back of the line. That actually was a good thing to get the best time from them, because what we did is I used their speed times to determine who had the green light in games. So if they were a guy that was at a certain threshold of speed, I would always give them the green light. So we would do that at practice. But I noticed that when I tried to rush them through it, they went from 3.8 to 4.0 to 4.2 instead of staying at that 3.8 or getting faster. And I know Sam mentioned that the other day. So I think that's such a huge deal. We can incorporate agility routines in the beginning of practice as well. I actually like to do this in my skill development stuff. So I'll do a lot of reaction drills and lateral side movement stuff for infielders, and then for outfielders, it's more opening the hip stuff. So working backwards. And Sam, I really like some of the drills that you were talking about. But before we get into that, would you recommend doing more sprint work before practice or more lateral movement before practice? Or can we do a combination of both?
Combo. So I'd say that I like sprint work a lot. I think that top speed is so important. So the people who talk speed a lot, they talk about speed reserve. So it's basically like if you're 100% or 100% speed is really fast, your 90% speed, which is where baseball probably lives, because you're always rounding and turning, you're never really just going a straight line for a long period of time. Your 90% is going to be easier, it's going to be effortless, and it's going to be more accessible. So the number one is if you're faster, your 90% is going to be better, so it makes everything else a little bit easier. But that being said, I think the other stuff is so important. Being able to train the side to side and change the direction and quick movements is super important. So I don't think it can be one or the other. If you train, let's say 3 sprints or 4, let's say it's 5 sprints at the beginning of practice at 100%. I mean, those guys are not going to be shot. Not if you built a decent base throughout the off season or whatever it was. Hopefully these guys are at the point now where you can do that, take a little break, go on the field. Now you can start to train some of that reaction, some of that lateral drill. You might have, if you're practicing or with the guys 4 or 5 days a week, you might have 2 days that are focused on sprinting, and you might have the other 3 where you do more change of direction. And the change of direction stuff, I mean, some of the drills are so easy, and you can tie them in with baseball or softball really easily, so you're training both qualities at the same time. And I think the biggest fault that I usually see is, and this was me for a long time too, is I guess I really didn't understand what that stuff should look like. Like, I understood that we need to change direction and we need to work on it, but I didn't understand what it looked like when it was done really, really well and what it looked like when it wasn't, and how to coach that. Right? So if I have a guy who's, let's say, and baseball is a different sport, same with softball, where you're not really changing direction all that much. It's just that quick start. But basically, you're trying to see, can an athlete get into a good position to produce a lateral power fast? And even with steals, for a long time, I knew that you had to steal, and I knew you had to be fast in your first few steps, but I didn't understand how to coach that or teach that. And if you see an athlete, one of my best friends growing up, the dude literally couldn't move. He would start to steal, and it was 10 seconds before he took a step. Before he actually moved, he took 7 steps in the same spot. So learning how to coach that and what's going on there is really good. So if you start there, right, and you see an athlete who's just not accelerating well, the first piece of it is when you accelerate, you need to be going this way. So to go that way, your body can't be this way. It has to, start to actually have a lean on it so you can produce force horizontally. And what they're studying now a lot of is basically the athlete that can develop. So say me and Ron, let's say we sprint and we're right next to each other. Let's say I produce way more force than Ron because I work out more, right? Let's say that we do that, but my force is this way and his force is this way. He's probably going to get a higher percentage of his force going horizontally. So he's actually going to accelerate quicker than I will. So the force, even if you have the same amount of force, if you're pushing it up and down, you're not moving forward. So you have to make sure that you're getting an athlete to understand how to basically angle their shin to push themselves forward instead of up. And then as you get to a top speed, you're going to see athletes that are more upright, but that won't happen initially. When you see an athlete start to sprint, they need to lean. And if you got a guy who's not going fast, the odds are is he's not pushing any force that way. A lot of his force is straight up and down and not horizontal. So yeah.
So is that getting into when you do A skip, B skip, C skip work where their heel doesn't hit the ground because then they can actually push off their toes and they can actually get going that way? Is that kind of the theory behind that?
So I would say A skips and B skips are going to relate more to top speed than acceleration.
Okay.
Because you're so upright, because of the posture. So
Right.
like when I coach acceleration with guys, we usually start on the wall and we'll do the wall drills where you're leaning.
Yep.
And any drill where you can get a nice lean on the guys, I think is really helpful.
So like
Because if
mountain
you can get
climbers
them,
and things like that.
So if we go on the wall, it's almost like a mountain climber on the wall,
Yeah.
but we're working on positions, right? So you're gonna have the hands like chest height, back up about 2 big steps away, and then just fall into the wall so your arms are straight. And you're gonna have that nice horizontal lean, and then basically you're just trying to teach them how to produce force quickly and get their foot off the ground. So I think that stuff works really well. It's when you're teaching speed and acceleration, you just can't get tired. So if we're even doing those drills, I'm only doing them for 10 to 20 seconds at the tops, even if it's a low intensity drill, like 20 seconds is probably my max. But I might have like a youth athlete, I might have them just hold that position on one leg with their other knee up. So basically like what it's gonna look like in between steps. And if they can't hold that for 20 to 30 seconds without moving, they're probably not strong enough to accelerate really well. So you can even work, like if you want to talk about strength, you can do it that simply where like if a guy can't do that, it's pretty much a plank because your arms are out, so the lever's a little bit farther away, which makes it a little bit harder. And you can do that as a way to work on some basic strength with the guys. They can see their issues. A lot of times they might not be able to get their back hip involved or back hip extended. And you can teach it right there. They can feel it. Because you might have a guy that just rotates really heavily. As soon as we get onto his left leg and right knee up, his right hip dips and his left hip's higher, So you can work on that type of stuff. What I've been seeing a lot of is this guy, Lee Taft. He does a lot of stuff in the baseball realm with change of direction. He talks about 6 or 7 different movements of athleticism, but one of the big ones is just learning how to take a lateral step really fast. And he talks about sprint work and how to basically be able to create that lateral movement fast. And what it comes down to is it's pretty much like your shin angle and your ankles. So if I'm trying to, let's say I'm going from left to right, I need to make sure that my left knee is going to be inside my foot so I can push in the other direction. Like it's really important. So you're actually going to have an internally rotated left hip to push myself out to the right. That's the only way I'm going to be able to use my external rotators of my left hip. So when you look at that type of stuff, you can start to get into it more. And then what I usually see with youth athletes, so let's say any athlete under, 13 maybe, you're going to see that most of them can't change directions and have no ability to accelerate. They just don't have it. Change of direction, they're not strong enough at all. So if I'm moving forward really fast, you have to be strong to be able to stop on a dime and turn around. And a lot of the athletes they're not strong enough. So they can get going, but once they get going, they're not strong enough to stop it with their quad or their hamstring or glute or whatever it is. They're just not able to push into the ground hard enough. So I think that's really big. And then for acceleration, I use the bike analogy. So if you flip a bike upside down, when you get the bike going, you need to grab the wheel and you need to freaking pull. You got to get it going. It's going to take you a few things, a few movements, and then once you get it going, it's just you slide and you just keep it going. And that's pretty much what sprinting is. Your first few steps, they can be really indicative of speed and strength. Because if you don't have strength, you're not going to be able to get that first few steps of power. And then at that point, you might eventually be able to get to top speed. It's just going to take you longer.
Right.
So I want to make sure those first few pulls, those first few pushes are able to be powerful. And that's really indicative a lot of times of issues at the youth level, just because most of the athletes don't work on any type of strength before, they think they're old enough at like 13 or 14. When in reality, strength can be so simple as, again, like me and Austin were just talking about, it might just be get a guy into a lunge position, have him start and just hold that with his knee an inch or two above the ground. And I'm telling you, I did it with one of my athletes the other day who was having shoulder problems, and he literally, he couldn't do 5 lunges in a row without his whole hips shaking and whole body moving. He couldn't stabilize. If I asked him to hold it, he would have just fell down. I could have pushed him with one pinky, I guarantee, and he would have just went down. So, an athlete like that, they're going to have trouble being accelerating with any type of speed. They're going to have trouble with any type of change of direction. It's just not going to happen. They might hit top speed and be okay, but it's going to take them a long time to get there. And acceleration is the name of the game for baseball.
Yeah, I think the stabilizing thing is huge too. Like the one thing that you talk about a lot, especially from what my conversation has been with you, but with the youth athletes, the younger guys, is, I always say that they're not strong enough. If a guy's unbalanced when he's hitting, I'm just like, okay, well, this guy, he's doing one of two things. He's either swinging way too hard or he can't physically balance himself, which is a stabilizing issue. So when we go to the gym, that's the biggest thing is we just want to learn how to stabilize, but that also helps with changing direction too. And the core it has a huge role in stabilizing and changing direction because, and I know you're getting this to a little bit, I want to get to some of these questions, but if you can't actually stop your body and go, I mean, if your core keeps going this way and your body keeps going this way, how are you going to get going the other way? It's impossible. So that's big. I want to hit on Sean's question. I'll let you hit on what Steve said. But how would you do anything different with athletes to run better defensively with the glove versus base running? For me, whenever I would play infield, I used to run at my hip. So I would keep the glove kind of at my hips, which would give me room to actually work. I didn't want my glove working too far away from me because I wanted my movement to be very efficient as an infielder. So I would start it at my left hip, keep it on my left hip, and then work from there. It worked for me. That's kind of how we taught it. I learned it from a guy who's in the A's organization at the time that's what they did. So I used it. I really liked it. As for outfield stuff, the only thing that I teach is don't run with your glove in the air, please. Like get it tucked. You know what I mean? Make sure it's either tucked or you're kind of using it as you're running normal. But same thing with base running. The arms play a huge role in speed, and Sam can get into this a little bit more, but the arms play a big role in it. So you can't allow the glove to kind of slow you down. So you realistically just want that to be a part of your running motion and your arm motion anyway. So Sam, I know you can elaborate on that side of it a little bit more and then get into what Steve said about some ladder stuff.
So I think that's great. I think what you guys were doing and what you've been doing, you know, stuff from the A's organization with the glove by the hip is awesome. And one of the things that was opening up in my eyes is when you look at stealing, right, you see two different types of base runners with what they do with the arms. And you'll see one guy who has their arms really long and he's just hanging his arms. And you see another one with like bent elbows and he's ready to go. And if you guys think about it really simply, and if I have a broom and like just a broomstick and I hold it at the very, you know, end of it right by where the broom actually is, if I hold it super light, it's really easy to maneuver. If I grab it at the very end, so I increase the length of that lever arm, and not that it's heavy, but it definitely is harder, right? So if I'm trying to move it really fast now, it's not going to move as fast as if I held it at the very end. So it's the same thing with your arms. If you have a glove on because that's extra weight, if your arm is long, the lever's longer, it's going to be harder to move. It's going to be slower. So same thing when you sprint. Like when we sprint, we never want the arms straight. Because if your arms are straight, that lever is too long, it's just not going to be fast. It's the same reason if I was lifting a barbell, I don't want it far away from my body, because the further it is from my body, the heavier it becomes. If you hold a dumbbell right by your side, it's going to be light. If you hold it an inch in front, it's a little harder. If you hold it 3 inches out, it's a little bit harder, and so on and so forth. So that's the same concept, I think. As far as drills that you can do with that too, me and Ron just talked about it on the last one. When you guys do, like, when we talk about agility drills, do them with your glove on. Like, a lot of times you can do them, you can actually replicate fielding. So you might do a drill and, you know, if we talk about reaction, I might have an athlete turn around, so face away from me, and they're going to turn around. As soon as they turn back to me, I'm going to roll a ball in one of two directions, either their forehand or the backhand. And as soon as they see where the ball's going, I need them to take a really quick step. So we're training reaction. I want to see if that athlete can get into a good position to push and drive into that position. And then we're actually fielding a ground ball. So they're going to learn how to move with their glove as well. So you can train with that. And for outfielders, you know, I think Ron's right. I think honestly just repetition of tracking fly balls is the best way to do it. Just get a guy to tuck his arm. So when we teach sprinting mechanics, like top speed, your elbow should pretty much be bent at around 90 degrees the whole entire time. And all they do is you're basically get your motion from the shoulder where your elbow just stays fixed. It's almost like I had a brace around my elbow and it can't move. It's the same thing when your glove is there. You just curl the glove into your arm so it doesn't become a longer lever, because as soon as you make that lever longer, it's going to be slower. So, I mean, I think that as far as, you know, sprinting with your glove on, just doing stuff like that, I think that will almost be trained automatically as long as you do some of those drills. And as far as ladders go, I'm not a huge fan of them once they basically master them. So they're great, I think, for, you know, the youth athletes and for athletes who've never really done agility work. I think it can be great. You're learning how to move your feet quick. You're learning how to do it in a lot of different movements, a lot of different fashions. And they feel success because the first time they do it, they're not that good. The second time, they're a little better. And the third time, they're great. What I found is usually, you know, after an athlete does it for a few weeks, maybe a month or two, you're going to find they can literally do it with their eyes closed and they get absolutely nothing out of it. So I think it works for a little bit. And then once they become really good at it, I throw it in sparingly. But I wouldn't use it often because at some point, it becomes so easy they're not even benefiting. So at that point, then as soon as they get good at that, now I want to challenge them more. I want to get them uncomfortable. I never want to leave a stimulus in there for long enough that they're going to be really, really comfortable with it. Like if they master something, let's build on that. I'm not going to throw that away because that's counterintuitive, but we're going to build on it. So for instance, if we're working on change of direction, in the fitness world, we use skaters. So basically learning how to jump from your left side to your right foot. And what we're working on there is basically, can you produce force to your left foot? After an athlete masters that, we progress. So the next thing that we do is we add maybe a jump to their left. So now they have to accept that load and then be able to still produce that same force out to the right. So now we're not only working on producing it, but now we're working on absorbing, transferring, and producing again. And it's the same thing from there. You can do the same thing with side shuffle into it, and then go, boom. So all you want to do is any skill you're working on, start with the basic levels of it, break it down, and then build on it, right? So you're never going from one thing like ladders and saying, okay, we're done with any type of agility. It's like ladders are great. Now let's build on that. Now that you guys know what you're doing there, like let's challenge you a little bit more. Maybe we'll throw in the ladders, but instead of doing them for 10 minutes, we're going to do it for 3 minutes, and then we're going to move on to something harder for you guys. So that's kind of what I've seen with ladders. A lot of guys master them really quick, and then all of a sudden they can just do them with their eyes closed, blindfolded on one leg.
Yeah, so what I started doing with our guys, I used to err on the ladder drills a lot as a general warm-up, and then what I realized was that they weren't really getting much out of it. Standing up tall, form was real bad. They kind of were getting lazy with it, so I moved more into the reaction drill type stuff. And I showed this in the last group. I use Crazy Ball. Crazy Ball is awesome for reaction stuff. It's really, really good to do on a hard floor like a tile or a wood floor, gym floor, something like that. I like to do reaction ball stuff because of the change of direction. It actually gets them going. I think it actually gets their body working and their eyes working too. I really, really like reaction ball stuff a lot. Sam mentioned in the last group, I actually haven't done this one yet. I think I'm starting incorporating this with the outfielders because you can do it without throwing the ball really high, is have them take a couple jogging steps forward and then throw a ball over either one of their shoulders. They're going to have to brace and get into the ground and then turn around and sprint back to go catch the ball. I really like that one a lot. That's one that you can do for reaction as well. Any type of side shuffle drill is really good for infielders. We do those ones a lot. You can even incorporate that into your prelim work. So like the way that I kind of structure a practice is visualization is started for a couple minutes with the whole team or an individual. Then you get into your team warm up. So once you get into your team warm up, that's your dynamic warm up that we talked about the other day. You can just start doing some sprint work. And then once you're kind of done with your preliminary stuff, that's when you get into your preliminary skill work where your outfielders are going to go and do their skill work, like their QB drills, or the infielders are going to do their hands drills. Catchers are going to go do their catching prep work. That's when you can start to incorporate the skill development stuff. So you can start to incorporate reaction drills. For infielders, after they're done with their hand stuff, you can do any type of side shuffle work. Reaction ball stuff. We used to have to, it was a requirement whenever I was in college to do reaction ball in the off season for our individual sessions. So we would have 45 minutes of individuals with our coach, and then we would have to do 45 minutes to an hour on our own of other stuff. It was a requirement that we did Crazy Ball because that was us to kind of change direction when we weren't able to with our team. So I really like those ones before practice. And then the outfielders, the QB drills are an easy one where, you say, okay, go, they turn around, they turn their hips, and they run after a ball. But I like the one that Sam said where they have to brace because that's more realistic to what you're going to get in a game whenever they have to actually react and kind of brace into the ground. And then as for getting out of the batter's box, I got this question last group, and I really like this one, was how can we get faster out of the batter's box? So, Sam, can you go into that term that you were talking about? Was it the short – what was that?
Stretch shortening cycle?
Stretch shortening cycle, yeah. So can you go into that and kind of what that is and then how that applies? I actually think that applies to every single part of the game. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
So I'll say one thing right before that, and then I'll get into it. So I think number one for especially a righty, but even a lefty, it comes down to what me, you, and Austin were talking about right at the beginning, is can an athlete, if I swing, can I stop my swing? If I already hit the ball, I already got extension, the ball's already off, right? I need to be able to stop it and move. And a lot of athletes simply don't have the strength and stability to basically go from no tension, right? I'm just flowing, it's athletic and things are moving, to stop and then go. And a lot of athletes, you might see an athlete, especially a youth athlete, swings and they're off balance and the swing takes them, the bat's going with them, and they have to get strong enough to be able to stop that force. So again, if you can train that ability to, like with med ball drills, you do like a scoop and do a fake scoop and see. Like if you have an athlete, and what I do, I'll test them. Like if I have an athlete on day one, I just don't know like where they're at, I'll do a med ball scoop with them and I'll have them do a real scoop right to me. I'll just have them throw as hard as they freaking can right at me, right? I'll challenge them a little bit. And then I'll have them do it again, but right before they throw it, I actually want them to stop it. And number one, I'm going to keep my eyes open because some athletes can't stop it. But second piece of it, you're going to see some athletes just slow everything so far down where all of a sudden they're like 50%. So I know for that athlete, he would have trouble getting out of the box, for instance, or he's going to basically lay back on his swing. It's one of the two. he's either going to be slow getting out because the swing takes him, or he's going to basically pull back on a swing so he can go. So that's step one. If you don't have that type of stability to basically be able to produce power and then stabilize and change, you're not going to be able to change directions. And then getting into the stretch shortening cycle. So we use the example of a doctor's office, and they have that instrument, right, where they hit your kneecap right below your kneecap, they hit your tendon, and all of a sudden your foot shoots up. There's that reflex everywhere throughout our body. And we can't just rely on muscles. And I think for a long time, the conversation has always been just get stronger, get more muscle. That dude, you got to get yoked. If I can train my nervous system, because that's what that is, I can train my nervous system to be able to use that cycle more effectively. And as soon as it feels a stretch, to be able to push and get out of it, that's how I'm going to be able to produce more power. I'm going to be faster. I'm going to be able to change direction quicker. And that's what the best athletes in the world do. So as a quick example, the way you're going to see it, if you look at an ankle hitting the ground, right? So let's say this is my ankle, and then we'll say this is the ground. As soon as they hit, they're going to get a stretch in the ankle where it's going to bend like that. Boom. Can they then produce that force quickly, or is it going to sit in that for a second and be slow on it? And you can change that ability that, boom, as soon as it gets a stretch, boom, it's going to go out of that, and you're going to actually be a lot quicker without training, without getting any stronger. You're just simply training the ability for your nervous system to feel the stretch and react to it really fast. So we train that all the time in here in the weight room. And this guy, Cal Dietz, he came up with this philosophy called triphasic training. And I won't get too much into it, but there's 3 phases to every contraction. And you'll find that some athletes, you might have to do stuff like that because they might be really, really weak in one point of it. And as soon as you strengthen that, now all of a sudden they can do it quickly, right? So if you look at a jumping motion, let's look at a vertical jump. You have the eccentric, where you're going down. That's where you're loading your hips. You're loading maybe your quads, your calves. You have that eccentric. Once you get down there, you have then the concentric. You're going up, right? So that's where your actual muscles are going to produce force. They're going to drive yourself up. In between that, there's what's called the amerization phase. And that's basically the difference between you going down and going up. So it's that time period, that really, really short time period where you're changing directions. And they actually did a ton of studies on this, and they basically found that a better athlete, an athlete who's going to be quicker on the field, can always produce that force and get into that amerization phase. They're quicker there. They can always do it quicker. They can always change that direction quicker. Because at the end of the day, if you go down and you load and it takes you a second to get out, you just miss the play. It needs to be able to be quick. So like when I have an athlete in here, for instance, on day 1, if we do a long jump test, and if you guys don't test a long jump or a sprint test with your guys, it might be a good idea, but we do a long jump with our guys because we don't have enough space where we're currently at to do sprinting. So what we do is we do a long jump test, and when they load and unload, they do their jump, I can tell literally within a second if that athlete is super athletic or not. Because if I have an athlete who's already athletic, they're going to be able to load and explode really fast. And I've had athletes do it, and I didn't have to coach them at all, and I just look at them and I'm like, all right, I'm a little impressed, right? They literally just loaded and unloaded really quick because that's what your body's meant to do. You're not going to load slow to produce force. You're going to load fast to explode fast. So if you have an athlete who can't do that, that's what you need to be training. And that's honestly like change of direction. That's literally what it is. It's basically, can I accept force this way and then change direction the other way? Even if you look at fielding position. So oftentimes, and I don't know what you guys coach exactly for fielding position, but you'll see guys who are just on their toes and there's no movement at all and they're just staying there. And when that happens, we're losing the ability to use our stretch reflex. We're losing that stretch shortening cycle, and we can't utilize it anymore. So you'll see outfielders in the big leagues who are almost completely upright, and they'll just start taking a step or 2 in right before the pitch. And as soon as the ball's hit, they're going to take like 1 jab step, get that stretch shortening cycle, boom, and they're out. It's the same thing for infielders just on a bigger level, right? They have to be loose. You have to be in an athletic position to get that reflex so you're going to be able to produce power quick. If you're flat on your feet, even if you're on the ball, your foot, but you're just standing there, you're losing the ability to use that reflex. So that's really crucial, I think. I think it plays a really big role. Even if you look at swinging, it's basically the concept of being able to load and explode really fast. You know, do I have a guy who's just trying to sit back, or is he loading and then unloading?
Can I go into that?
Big league hitters, they load and unload.
Can I go into that for a second? Because we actually talked about prep stepping in the fielding session, and when Jake was explaining kind of how he teaches BAM fam to go through their fielding stuff, I remember that we talked about we don't want our prep step to be where that glove is out and our legs are kind of solidified into the ground. And we showed Correa and we showed Andrelton Simmons, and Lindor, and they're like standing straight up, and it looks like they're not even ready. And then right as soon as the baseball or softball enters the hitting zone, it's boom, foot gets down, they're gone. And I think that's such a big thing for the agility side of things as well, because if we're unable to kind of hit and go, I was actually legitimately taught to get my glove out at the Division I level. I was taught to get my glove out and prep step. And as soon as the ball enters the hitting zone, I should be running. But then I was never able to make that quick reaction. I actually figured it out myself in summer ball that I was a lot faster when I was standing upright, because as soon as my feet would hit the ground, I was able to go. And I think that that's the same thing that we can actually train our athletes with these agility drills. That's why it's so important to do them in practice, because then the prep step conversation is easier. Because then we could just say, hey, listen, remember you were doing those reaction drills, and as soon as your foot hit the ground, you were going back and catching a fly ball. I need you to create that same type of feeling when you're prep stepping. So as soon as you hit the ground, the ball should be hit so you can make your movement. That's how we can have our athletes, and I hear this all the time, have our athletes have that quicker first step. You know what I mean? Oh, wow, that kid has a really good first step. Well, no, he's just preparing his body better. So as soon as his foot hits the ground, he's going. That's trained. And we train that now. And so even if we're not doing sprint work, our athletes are still getting faster because either their first move or lateral quickness is better. And then once they actually get into a sprint work or into their sprint work, they're strong enough, they're able to stabilize, and then they understand how to hit the ground and keep going really quick. So they're going to get faster that way too. So a lot of this stuff with space restrictions and time restrictions, we can still actually train the athleticism piece of that. And we can do that in our warm up, I think, or at least right after the warm up, which I think is huge.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So
I fully agree. I think that's super important. A lot of times for the guys, like right now, they think that they can't get stronger. And I told the last group, I see it all the time. If I have somebody who's really fast, I would almost bet on it, any type of money that you wanted, that they're going to at least be able to deadlift a decent amount of weight once I can teach them how to deadlift properly, just because they've been used to producing so much force from the backside. I see it all the time. Like the fastest guy I've had in here, he literally was the best day one deadlifter I've had. It's not a secret, and that's why we focus on deadlifting. But at the same time, there's a balance, because I've had athletes deadlift 400 pounds and not be fast whatsoever. So there's always a balance between it. You're gonna find, like, I'd rather err on the side of speed, because if I have an athlete who's fast, they can usually deadlift well. Where if I have an athlete who's strong, they're not always going to be fast. So I'd kind of err on speed, but it's the single best thing they can do right now, without a doubt.
And they can get stronger through that too. Like, they can actually maintain strength by running. They can actually maintain their strength by doing speed work, right? I didn't realize that too. Sam and I had this conversation a couple of weeks ago about this, but for a lot of the athletes that don't have access, we got athletes that lift 3-4 days a week, and they're unable to right now, because it's not like they can just go out and buy all this equipment to put in their house. So the conversation with Sam and a lot of our athletes right now is, okay, so let's do sprints 4 days a week then. If you want to keep and maintain your strength, then you need to sprint, because the power output is just as, close to just as great or more than lifting weights, right, Sam? So realistically, a lot of these guys are going to do 20, 40-yard bursts, and we can get into the times too, because I actually like the idea of running for time rather than running for distance when it comes to sprint stuff. I think that's a huge point that we forget about and miss. I made that mistake a while ago. I used to sprint based on yardage on a football field and didn't know why I wasn't getting faster instead of chasing the clock. And I know that with Sam, he talks a lot about we can only stay at our optimal level for a certain period of time. So we actually want to only sprint for that certain period of time. So you can actually do that in your sprint work with your athletes. Instead of having them run from first to second, take a timed sprint and then have them stop at that specific time, right? So can you go into that a little bit? I don't know if we touched on that yet.
Yeah, so a lot of times what I coach, and like when I write programs for guys, a lot of times I'm not going to give them a distance for two reasons. Number one, a lot of times they literally will have no idea what a distance is. If I write like 60 yards or 40 yards or 30 yards, they have literally no clue. And they're not going and checking. Like if somebody wrote that for me, I'm probably going to a track or a football field, and I'm probably going to like measure that out. Most athletes don't care, and they're going to go 30 yards. Oh, yeah, this is about 30 yards. I'm just going to do this. And all of a sudden they're running 50. They go, 60, which is the longest I would ever really do. And they might look at it and go, oh, yeah, okay. And they do it, and it's like 80 yards, right? So sprinting for like 15 seconds, it makes no sense. So a lot of times what I do for the athletes is I'll just give them a time frame, and we'll sprint for like 4 to 6 seconds. Or I might even just tell them to maintain their top speed for about 4 seconds. And that's it. And you can do there's a lot of different sprint work. So we talked about like acceleration, and you can do acceleration all the time doing these 10-yard sprints because they're not that fatiguing. You can take 2-3 minute breaks, minute break, minute 30, and you can hit it. But if you're doing like a top speed day where you need an athlete just to get faster, let's not even talk about acceleration day, just not fast enough. You might have them actually like jog into it, and you might have them start, say, 20 yards back from the foul line, jog to the foul line. As soon as he hits the foul line, you want him to kick up to like 100%. And it's a great way to train top speed without having to worry about acceleration or having an athlete spend a lot of time trying to work on acceleration. And a lot of times, honestly, if an athlete gets hurt, it's usually in acceleration or trying to slow down. It's usually one of the two. So, sometimes that can even be a safer way to do it. So there's a lot of different ways you can train it. But yeah, I think that it's absolutely huge, man.
So 3-second sprints. And I know for what I used to do is, like I said before, with training our athletes for numbered sprints, I always wanted to get them down. So I wanted to figure out a way to get that sprint down. And so the way that I classified it was guys who were slow as they got going or slow at the start. And so I knew that when they were slow at the start, they just physically weren't explosive enough, or they were standing straight up when they were trying to sprint. But then the guys that were slow as they got going, I knew that they just didn't produce enough force as they got going, or their legs weren't moving fast enough. And so a lot of times when I would do sprint work with guys, at least at our field, I would try to get them to go the 90 feet, but I would have them in their mind focused on being faster either at the start or as they were continuing to go. It helped a little bit, but we weren't actually training that like crazy. I think for you guys with your steel breaks, like from the baseball side of things, I think that we should incorporate steel breaks into every single practice, because I think that it helps with the reaction time, but also gets that sprint work in. But I also think that we should time it too. You know what I mean? At least have a timer where the whole team is running for, let's say it's a 3.5 second burst, right, Sam? So if they're running for 3.5 seconds, we say stop right at 3.5 seconds. That kid who's in last place, all he has to do is he has to try and be further on the field in that 3.5 seconds than he is right now. So instead of going for that distance, all that athlete's trying to do is, okay, so if he only got 15 feet in 3.5 seconds, maybe next time he wants to get 25 or 30 feet. So now he's challenging himself to get out further, which is going to make him more explosive. And I think that in turn, actually, you're going to get more of a benefit from that, instead of running a 40-yard dash and trying to chase the clock and make the clock go down. Because we all know that, like, and I went through this for a long time, as I was right around a 7.0 runner. I was never super fast, but never super slow. But for me to get from a 7.0 to a 6.9 was like pulling teeth for years. Like, it was so hard. But if I just in myself was like, okay, I'm going to run for 6.5 seconds, and wherever I'm at, I think that I probably would have gotten further, because I would have pushed myself that way, because I knew I was going to run out of time instead of trying to make my time shorter. So I think that's a really good way to do it. And then I also want to talk about, we talked about mobility and flexibility yesterday. I really think that applies into speed and agility. And I really think it applies into actually getting into some routes and lateral movement in baseball and softball. So how can we train speed and agility or how can we train mobility and flexibility within our lateral work and our skill training and our agility training?
So I think number one, it's important to recognize like where that comes into play. So for me, I was a really tight middle infielder. I had, Ron can attest to that. I literally could not get like a ball up the middle. I couldn't do anything. I literally couldn't move side to side. I lost everything. And for me, that was pretty much because the inside of my hips were really tight, my groin. Getting a little more into it, it might be like hip internal rotation or external rotation. Like for me, I had 0 hip internal rotation. It was really, really bad. My hip external rotation is still terrible. And I don't work on it at all because I don't play baseball anymore. But for you guys to be able to actually develop some speed, you have to be able to load into hip internal rotation, because when you actually produce that strength from a lateral movement, right? If I'm just trying to steal, my left leg has to internally rotate essentially, and then be able to externally rotate really fast. And then my right leg's going to be able to produce the power. If I'm a middle infielder or something like that, you obviously have to have good enough hips as far as the inside of the hips. You have to be mobile enough that you can move laterally and you're not going to be restricted because your legs can't go apart at all. And, basically what happens is you're going to have a relationship between the two, where if the inside of your hips are tight, the outer hips are going to be restricted in the sense that they're not going to be able to do their job. It's basically like you're putting a Band-Aid on what the outer hip can do, and the outer hip can't do their job right because the inside of the hip is fighting with them. It's playing tug of war all the time. So the more that you can actually get that, that guy mobile in that sense, he's going to be able to actually get there now. So and you could easily add that into like a warm-up to get some like hip opening. Doing some lateral like split squats and lateral lunges is really effective. I will say the most important thing when you guys do any of this stuff is focusing on the quality of it. So like for my warm up, I know I have tight inside of the hips. My adductors are tight, so I stretch them out by actually strengthening them. So when I do like a stretch, I'm actually trying to make sure that my tissue is working in that sense. Because if I just stretch, it's not going to do anything. If I'm asking my outer hip to produce X amount of force, if my inner hip can't, stabilize that force, it's not going to work well. It's just going to stop me from doing it. So if you guys do like a lateral lunge and just have the guys try to actually like get into the right hip, stretch out the left one when they do it, they're just going to feel a nice little stretch and then come back up to like 5 reps on each side. You're going to find the guys can move a little bit better. Even just doing like a normal squat. Like if you guys have normal, so if you guys get your guys just a little bit stronger and have them do normal squats, they're going to be a little bit stronger. It's just making sure they're doing everything the right way. Because I've seen a lot of guys do squats completely wrong and they're not getting any of that benefit. So it really comes down to how you're doing it, making sure that you're doing it right. But that stuff I think actually plays a huge role in it. If I'm trying to, let's say I'm a center fielder, or right fielder, or left fielder. Let's say that I'm trying to open up my hips and turn. Well, if I can't because my hip rotation is limited, I'm going to have to take probably an extra step. So if I can't open up, let's say a ball's hit over my head to the right, and I can't open up, my left leg stays there, my right leg opens up. If I can't do that well enough, maybe they even move a little bit. If I can't do that well enough, I'm pretty much going to start going diagonal a little bit short of where I need to go, and I'm going to have to correct that with like a curved sprint as I go. And that's not optimal, right? That's not what we want. So, and that's just stuff that you guys might be able to see with your athletes. Like, if you have an athlete who's not taking a good route, that might be part of it. He might literally just not have the hip, either maybe the function, he might just not understand what his hips should do. So maybe you should have to train him. And I think for a lot of youth athletes, probably what it is. They might not just understand what it should look like. But sometimes they literally might not have the mobility to actually open up into a good position. So you might have to figure out how they can get into a better position quickly. And that takes knowing your athletes, because you might have 2 center fielders, your A and B, and they're going to have to get in that position slightly different just because of their athletic ability. And I mean, that's your job as a coach to kind of figure that out and feel it out, because everybody is a little bit different, and the start's going to be a little bit different for everybody. If you look at steals, if you look at getting into steal position, the way that we kind of break it down is if I'm obviously going to my right foot is going to basically take weight off of it. So if I'm like immediately trying to break to my right, I'm going to take weight off of my right foot. That's going to let my angles drive towards second. So my knee's going to dip. Everything's going to start to angle. I'm going to push with my left leg just enough that I get a little momentum going. And that little momentum is going to get my right foot in a better position to now plant and drive myself to second. You might have 2 athletes that do that slightly different, though. You might have an athlete who's a little bit more, let's say stronger at the left hip. They're going to be able to drive themselves forward just a hair more. So you're actually going to see that if I have my right foot here and my left one here, I'm actually going to drive from here. Where you might have another one do almost like a false step where they try to push here, but they're not strong enough, so they have a false step, and then they go. And that's not terrible. You just know that athlete probably needs to get a little bit stronger, or maybe they just need to train that quality, right? So every athlete's a little bit different on what that's going to look like, but the overall idea is the same. Like, you need to be able to get horizontal if you're trying to move in any direction. It's just, it's the only way to do it.
Now for softball, because they start on the base and they already start turning towards second, will you just load up that back leg a little bit more and just load that up more and just make sure that the arms are at 90?
I haven't thought about it too much. I would say the biggest thing, again, if we're trying to use that stretch shortening cycle, I'd probably start a little bit shy of where I need to be to load, so that as soon as I go, I can actually load and explode really fast instead of being in a loaded position already. I'd probably be just shy of it.
I would say that most people probably err on already having their feet planted and they just push off that. That's what I would think. Like if I was to teach 10 and under baseball, which they do the same kind of leadoff, or softball, I'd probably have them kind of start in that same position. So you're basically saying do like a little bit of a decleat so that they can actually load into that and then go.
Yeah, I'd have to think about that one. I think a little bit more and actually picture it to give like really sound advice on it. But off the top of my head, I would say the stretch shortening cycle is going to be the quickest contraction that your body can produce, without a doubt. It's going to be way quicker than me just being loaded. Like if you look at it like in the weight room, right? If I'm at the bottom of a push-up and I try to just push up from the bottom as fast as I can, that's going to be slower than me going down and then up. It's going to be slower. So if I can get a little bit of a stretch out of it, I'm probably going to be a little faster. I don't know exactly what that would look like. I don't want to, BS you guys. I don't know exactly what that would look like to maximize it. because you're probably running the ground of how long is it going to take for you to get into that stretch cycle before you can produce it. So it's probably going to take some playing with to figure out, but that's just some research, I guess, that we'll have to do. Play with it a little bit.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I actually like the idea of that, because I know for me, at least, whenever I was talking to a lot of the softball players, they start with their left foot on the bag and the right foot's kind of to the side and behind it a little bit. But if they're already planted, then when they load back, they're actually going to sit there for a second. I see a lot of softball players, when they go to run, they actually sit back for a little while. So that's actually going to make that, what you're saying with the stress shortening cycle, it's actually not going to work, because they're not going to be explosive off the jump. No. Right now, if they actually start, let's say, a little bit of a step forward, and then now they step back and then go, they can actually use that as a timing mechanism to take off into their steal. Because I don't know, is it release or is it when ball gets a hitting zone?
Once he releases it, they can take off.
So as soon as that release happens, they should be like kick and go, and they should be on their way. Which I think that would make the girls faster, because it's giving them that same kind of idea as the prep step, which I think was huge. Yeah. Because then the reaction time is just a lot quicker.
They changed us this year, that the organization wants them to start in a sprinter stance, like their hands down and their one arm is back up in there, and that's how they want them to take off. And I try to tell them to use the bag to push off harder.
Right. So with the right leg, okay. That makes sense.
They switched it this year to make them so they look like they're actually in a track, run track. How the sprinter gets down in the blocks. That's how they are trying to have our girls start that this year. Okay. Because a lot of the college teams and stuff have started doing that too.
Right. Really interesting conversation. There's this guy, I can't remember his first name. It's either Adrian or Darian. His last name's Barr, B-A-R-R. And he's a really interesting guy. My buddy turned me on to him. He's a sprint guy. And he's basically changing his philosophy on how to start from a sprinter stance. So it's really interesting you guys talk about it, because if you're going into a sprinter stance, there's a huge argument on what that actually looks like and how you get the quickest few steps out of that. Yeah. So for him, he talks about falling. If you look at the KPIs, so the key performance indicators for sprinting, basically you're looking at a few things. You're looking at ground contact time. So how long is your foot on the ground? If your right foot's on the ground, is it staying there for a long time? Or is it basically coming up and going right to the next one? You're looking at rate of force development. So how much power are you producing? And then they're looking at what's now called the ratio of force. So out of the force you're producing, how much of it is horizontal? So how much is actually going to push you in the direction you want to go? And if you can immediately, basically he talks about falling, because if you almost out, and I say falling kind of loosely, but if you kind of let gravity take you forward, because gravity is going to basically bring you down quicker than you would actually be able to bring yourself down. If you can do that, that's going to make you more horizontal, and all of a sudden that ratio of force is going to be a lot better towards your favor. It's a really interesting concept. That's pretty much like how quick can you move your feet to get it going, but there's a balance of powers with it too. But yeah, just to get your mind going, I guess, if you can get into that falling position really quickly, where you're getting more horizontal, you're going to be faster. So I don't know how much I would push versus how much I would use my front legs. I think that's a tough thing to put. It's obviously the base is a huge advantage.
So it's basically like the 40.
Yeah.
What Joe just said about the NFL Combine 40, that's exactly how they wanted us to teach our girls how to lead off and take off the bags this year.
So start them on the ground, and it seems like a lot of times in the 40, that arm's pretty straight, isn't it, Sam? It's not really bent at a 90. I feel like they're straight, and they kind of got to drive into it.
The arms?
Yeah.
The arms are usually, they're a little bit above 90, I'd say, but anywhere from like 90 to 110 typically.
Okay. So, I mean, okay. That makes sense.
Or I would say also, too, you have guys pushing so hard that it might naturally go a little bit beyond that, but you're not going to see them like coached on it or thinking about it. It might just happen on there like intuitively.
Right.
So it's kind of like when we talk about certain actions that we're trying to coach between hitting mechanics or pitching mechanics, I might coach it down a little bit because I know an athlete's going to do more than that. So if I tell them 90 degrees and they end up at 110, I'm happy with it. But if I tell them 110, they end up at 130 or 140. Right. So I think it's kind of that same thing. So if I tell an athlete 90 degrees and they get to 100, 110, 120, I'm probably not super concerned about it.
Right.
It's just a matter of we don't want the elbow kind of doing this when you sprint. Like, you don't want that happening.
Yeah. Right.
Also, you got to keep in mind that those dudes are absolute savages, and they all can probably squat and deadlift over 400, 500, 600 pounds.
Right.
So the way that they do things is going to be probably different than a softball girl.
Yeah. Do you like the idea of the falling sprints and push-up sprints? I know we used to do a lot of those. Yeah. Are those beneficial? I actually really like push-up sprints because I actually thought that helped me kind of get horizontal faster instead of going straight up in the air. I knew like if I did a push-up sprint and I was like really, really slow out of the box compared to everybody else, I knew I stood straight up. So I actually like doing that for competition. I like those ones for competition. Then the falling sprint.
Oh man. So one of my favorite drills that we do, I love doing this with the youth athletes. It's so fun. So basically I'll have them just go with their shoulders and just lean into my hands, and I'll actually hold them up, but I'll bring them back far enough that they have like a nice, maybe 45 to 70 degree lean, probably like 60 degrees, maybe probably is a good sweet spot. And then basically I'll let go and I'll just move out of the way, and they have to not fall and sprint. And you'll find that like, then that's going to make them horizontal right there. But you're going to see like some guys are really good with it. Like some of my youth athletes, as soon as I drop them, they can push that ground laterally. They can get that horizontal momentum going, and they're gone. I have other athletes who immediately are basically getting into this rounded back and then getting upright, and they're all over the place, so they can't stabilize at all. So I think that's one of my favorite drills to actually, like, once they understand what it should look like, and then we want horizontal force, if I can just get them leaning and then let go, and to me, that's one of my favorite drills because they are basically forced to do it. They have no option. But I think the push-up one's a good one too. I think they both help.
You can do the leaning one with a partner or a teammate, you know, before practice too. I think it's awesome because then they can actually teach each other and work with each other.
Yep.
Especially if they understand how to keep their, you know, how to stay in that lateral position. I think is big. I mean, we went over a lot of drill stuff. I would definitely incorporate most of the stuff into your pre-prep work and your pre-skill work before practice, because once you get into practice, when there's going to start getting in team stuff and applying that, so you can definitely do a lot of that stuff for sure. I'm big on reaction stuff. I mean, I've got small space here, so I'm huge on reaction drills. I think that helps with that stretch shortening cycle. I think that's huge. So I would definitely do that. I would definitely get some of those reaction drills going, some of the agility stuff. They don't need a ton of space for it. And then sprint wise, just going through those key things that Sam kind of went through. So again, if you guys have any questions, oh, Joe, you got a question. Sorry, before we leave, can you explain what that looks like?
What are we talking about?
Yeah, Joe, explain what looks like the fall down sprint starts. I want to make sure we get this question out before we finish up.
Yeah, and I knew we flew through stuff. I don't mind staying a few extra minutes, you know, if you guys have something else too.
Oh, the push-up sprints. I got you. Okay, so basically everybody starts on the ground, kind of on their bellies, and their arms are kind of like they would be at the bottom of a push-up. And then you're going to kind of dig your toes into the ground a little bit so you can actually push off. And then as soon as coach says go, or, you know, you clap your hands or whatever you're going to do, they actually have to push up and get into a good sprint position to be able to run out. So if they get into a bad position or they stand straight up, or if they stay too low, they're actually going to fall on the ground. So they have to get to that good position where they can push off and actually get out. So with the push-up starts, they're basically starting on their bellies, and then they have to push themselves up to get going. I like that one a lot because it starts them in a horizontal position, and then for them to stay there, obviously they have to use their legs to push off too, but if they stand straight up in the air, they're going to be really slow. So
as a side note with that too, if you want like a bonus, if you do the same thing, but instead of having their head forward, have it like sideways. So if you just basically turn them, 90 degrees to the right or left, you can work on that lateral start, that lateral acceleration, just like you would, because now they're getting up and they're still going to be low, but now they have to get a lateral step in to start. So it can be a little more transferable to something like a steel start or something like that, because you're actually pushing laterally now too. It's the same idea though.
Awesome. If you guys got anything else for us, let us know. We actually got an email out today. Somebody sent us an email today, which is awesome. So the more questions you guys have, the better. So please ask. We'll be back tomorrow for a huge Q&A. I'll just answer it for Austin because he did in the last group. Tomorrow's kind of a recap of literally everything. So if you guys have any questions on literally anything that we talked about over the last 4 weeks, have them ready. We'll keep the mics open. We'll keep the chat open, and we'll kind of literally go through every single possible thing we can to make sure we clear up anything that you guys have questions on. So other than that, we'll see you guys tomorrow.
Sam, you gonna be on tomorrow?
Yeah, I'll be on tomorrow.
Well, I got a question about something, so.
Looking forward to it. Let's do it.
Sweet. All right, guys. We'll see you tomorrow.
All right, see you guys.
Later, guys.